What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., and Jesse Cofield hanging out with us in the DraftKings studio in Boston. We got a great show for you guys today. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us. Leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out here live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKingsNetwork.com, the YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, and more. A couple of great guests for you guys today. Bryant Young, NFL Hall of Famer, former Notre Dame great, and 49er, going to stop by and chat with us. Saw him at the game last weekend, Dad, that you were calling there, the 49ers-Packers game. He was out there with a bunch of his former teammates, and man, the 49ers alum, very illustrious given their team's history. And speaking of a guy who knows a lot about that entire division, Richard Sherman, hopefully going to stop by and chat with us as well, which will be interesting perspective, Dad, because in addition to being a guy who is a Brock Purdy truther and someone who's been out there supporting him, he also played for Jim Harbaugh at Stanford, and Jim Harbaugh is the flavor of the day right now as it finally freaking happened. I'm sure Michigan fans, even them, breathed a bit of a sigh of relief as now this dance and back and forth is over, and Jim Harbaugh is taking the head coaching job for the Los Angeles Chargers. They even on their social media account, Dad, put out the puffs of white smoke announcing a new pope had entered into reign in the Los Angeles Chargers. So like we talked about yesterday, Dad, not all that surprising. It seemed like the matchup that everyone had thought from the start made the most sense. So now, how do you feel like this has an opportunity to work out? How fast do you think Jim Harbaugh can get this back on track in Los Angeles?
Well, I mean, we know there's no grace period anymore in the NFL. It used to be at least 3, sometimes 5 years to build a program, and you don't get that anymore, especially with some coaches and some owners, I should say, who pull the trigger somewhat quickly. Just look at the Chargers where they went. They had Brandon Staley was there 3 years, right? 21 to 23. Before that, it was Anthony Lynn there from 17 to 20. So, you know, 2 coaches, for instance, 2017, probably to be beaten certainly by Tepper in Carolina as far as getting rid of coaches. But still, you don't get that long, though. Someone like Harbaugh, I mean, he was listen, we have to say it. Even with Bill Belichick available, Harbaugh was the grab, right? Harbaugh was the cherry on top of this coaching cycle. And real quickly now, there were 8 spots open. We have 4 filled. We took Brian Callahan to Tennessee. Antonio Pierce got the interim tag taken off with Vegas. Gerard Mayo in New England. And now Harbaugh with the Chargers. So, yeah, I do think he's going to get some time. And the whole thing here is why he went, and we know why he went, and Justin Herbert is the main reason. Him getting paid wasn't going to be the issue. Him getting Justin Herbert to lead this team to a potential title was, because that's what's missing from Justin Herbert's resume. He's got all the yards and touchdowns in the world, and they have talent there, but they could never muster it. They've been the most underachieving team with the talent we look at, and you say, why aren't they better? Well, now they get a chance to be better, but it's not like, Jim Harbaugh is going to go in there and snap his fingers, right? You have 4 players, both the receivers, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, and then your 2 defensive pass rushers, Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, all over $30 million cap hits this year. Yeah. So you're already projected over the cap, before you even get to work. So on what he needs to do, and we know the offensive talent there. Then there's the looking forward to the draft, the thought of taking his name, the tight end from Georgia, Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers, that I thought he would take him. God, he would love that tight end. They had Gerald Everett there, who tied for second in receptions. But, so that's down the road. So it's not like this comes with, oh, man, all our problems are solved. They have that to maneuver. What's he going to do? Can all those guys stay there? Who now, the domino effect, who is he going to take from Michigan? Hopefully Sharon Moore gets that job in Michigan. I know we'll talk about that. But this was the move everybody was waiting for, and the expectation, because Harbaugh, San Diego, 83% winning percentage, Stanford 75, 49 or 69, Michigan 77. He wins wherever he goes. He is a winning coach. who has been to a Super Bowl against his brother and lost, who has won a national championship now, and the expectation is for the Chargers to take that next step and not only play better, but get to a Super Bowl. That's the expectation with Harbaugh, but now let's see the staff he puts together and the work he does, especially, there's no real question of him on the offensive side, right? We know what he can do. What's he going to do on the defensive side? Is he going to bring Jesse Minter, the D coordinator from Michigan, over there to help that defense? Because that's really been an Achilles heel for them.
Yeah, I think the appeal with Jim, for all the reasons that you mentioned there, he's not only been a consistent winner at all these places, but he's actually been able to jumpstart it fast. And for fans of the NFL, remember his venture in San Francisco. Remember how quickly they were, one, able to come in and start winning, but also get the most out of what was there. In that situation, it was Alex Smith sort of reclaiming the former number 1 overall pick and getting the best out of him before they turned the reins over to Colin Kaepernick in that season where Greg Roman and the pistol offense kind of helped run wild in the NFL. He's able to do it so quickly, making the best of what's around and maximizing it. Dad, I think in a general sense, and this is true with a lot of people that have been head coaches before, but especially with Jim Harbaugh, someone where the identity, especially along the lines of scrimmage, carries so much, he knows what he wants. With so many of the coordinator hires, and certainly Brandon Staley most recently falls into that category, they're learning how to be a head coach on the fly. And with Brandon Staley, I think we saw that manifest most clearly on the outside in the way that he made some of those decisions that became the real lightning rod for him on fourth down aggressiveness, the areas that he was going forward and not, that sort of went hyper aggressive in year 1, that went back in year 2 and seemed like he was responding to a lot of the criticism, where he was learning how to be himself as a head coach as he went along. Jim Harbaugh hits the ground running right now, and for a program that's needed some help along the offensive and defensive lines for a while, I think that's the biggest area and the biggest win, and the reason why he'd have a chance. You look at Zion Johnson and Rashawn Slater are highly drafted guys on the offensive line that'll have a chance, I think, to help right away. It seems like Corey Linsley, their center, is probably headed towards retirement, and so they're going to have some spots to plug, but I think, Dad, just that alone, walking in and knowing how you want things done and being able to communicate that to the players in a way that leaves very little doubt about what the expectation is around the program automatically raises your floor a bit just based on that alone.
Yeah, everybody knows how he wants to play, right? And you have the quarterback, to be able to play that. You have, if you can get a running game going with the O-line, you have a quarterback who can throw the ball. Something he had at Michigan, but they lived more on the run. We're still McCarthy and the talk of the first round. I know some of us, I know you and I are a little unsure about that, but there's no denying that Herbert can throw the ball, and the expectation is for he to throw the way he's been and to take this team to the next level, and that's building it Jim's way. And that's the one thing you always wonder as former players when you get a new coach come in. You had it in college going from Charlie Weiss to Brian Kelly. I had it going from team to team in the NFL is you have different coaches and you know what to expect. When I went to Philadelphia from Houston, Buddy Ryan was a coach. I knew exactly what you need to expect from a Buddy Ryan as a head coach. Anybody on the Chargers knows exactly what Jim Harbaugh is going to want to do. He's been there, right? He's been there already. And you always wonder about players when you get a coach in, what do you think about that coach? Well, this guy has been successful in the NFL already, been successful on the college level. He comes in with instant credibility to say, my way works. And that's big. So the first thing you do is you get the stars of the team, the big money players who are going to be there, to buy into what you're selling, and then it trickles on down the line. And I don't think there'll be any problem. We have our fun with Jim Harbaugh about being quirky and some of the things, but my God, the dude can coach. Listen, he can coach. And I know people are going to say, he cheats to do it. Whatever. Dude can coach. At all the stops he was at, he is a winner. And the Charger fans should be extremely happy right now to get this guy and finally fulfill what we all thought was going to happen right away. And I'm glad it happened in the time it did, because as we know, there is the domino effect of where he leaves and coaches he wants to bring in and the whole thing.
Yep, I think you're right about that expectation, though, for people that go in as a player. That's all you can ask for is I know what's expected of me, and I know what our standard is at every turn. I mean, hell, you mentioned when Brian Kelly came in, it was the same thing at Notre Dame. We looked and we saw, hey, the bona fides, what he had done at Cincinnati, what he had done at Central Michigan, what he had done at Grand Valley State, the guys that had gone to the pros, the success they'd have. When he comes in, I mean, it was down to how we kept our lockers. That's more of a college thing, but it's the idea that no detail was spared in terms of how we were going to operate, and that was meeting times, how workouts were structured, what the practice structure was going to look like. When that's all spelled out, it makes your job so much easier as a player to try and go out there and execute. You mentioned, Dad, a lot of the personnel decisions they have. Gerald Everett, I believe, one of the guys that they would have to determine if they want to re-sign. Austin Eckler's in that same boat after a lot of the running back market did those one-year deals, and you've got all those expensive players. So that's one side he's going to have to contend with. The quarterback set. The other thing that you brought up was the coaching hires that are going to potentially be there. And this is where it does get interesting because Jim Harbaugh's almost got like an Ocean's 11's feel to who he can call upon here. I'm getting the old band back together to do one more job based on who's on the market, because you mentioned Greg Roman, who's obviously available after last year, was with him at Stanford and was with him in San Francisco for a lot of the good years. I saw Deontay Johnson yesterday, or Deontay Lee, yesterday tweeting about the possibility of David Shaw, the former Stanford coach, who's someone available now, who was on Jim Harbaugh's staff, working with the OCs and I believe receivers when they were at Stanford. And then defensively is where it gets interesting, Dad, because I'm like you. I thought Jesse Minter all the way. Their defensive coordinator with the Michigan Wolverines, if people weren't familiar, was with the Baltimore Ravens and his brother John before. They basically wife swapped with him and Mike McDonald and went back there, but it's a lot of the same stuff about their defenses. Michigan was basically the Ravens of college football. But then we had the news yesterday. Vic Fangio and the Miami Dolphins agreed to mutually part ways. Now, there was some thought that Vic Fangio did it to be closer to home and do some things. He consulted for the Eagles last year before the Super Bowl, and so everyone immediately pegged him in there. But this was also a guy who worked under Jim Harbaugh in those 49ers years on some really good defenses. And so you wonder if this is an A-team situation where all of a sudden he starts calling up all his old boys and says, hey, you got one more left in you. I think we can do something with this quarterback.
Boy, it's a great thought. And who wouldn't want to jump on that train? You know what you have. Now, defensively, it might be a little bit different. You have some talent there, but that has been a real thorn for that team. So you go in there and you say, okay, I gotta basically rebuild this defense. Offense is sitting pretty good, and then obviously you tinker with the personnel that you're going to bring in. But it does get interesting. And as soon as I saw the Vic Fangio thing, I thought that as well. Okay, he was with Harbaugh, so though you wonder if the Philly thing is done. Ron Rivera was talk with him, with Philly as well. So we'll see. I mean, but I'm with you. It's like Harbaugh, he wants to sit at the head of the table of his family. Okay? His dad's got a national title. He's got a national title. We heard all about the big boy
table from him after the title game.
I mean, he talks so much about it, and his brother's got a Super Bowl. Jim now has a chance to win a national title and a Super Bowl. If he could pull that one off, he now sits at the head of the table, and that would mean a lot for him. You got to love the Chargers and their social media, their tweet. Who's got it better than us? I mean, God knows we'll hear that saying over and over again. But that is an interesting thing now is, like you said, how does he build out the coaching staff and what moves do they make? Because it's certainly, and he knows, it's certainly different than college on how this is all going to build out with the money involved, though there's money involved in college now, but you know what I mean with contracts and such and cap numbers of what you have to do. You have to make some hard decisions. As I mentioned, 4 guys over $30 million. Can you fit all those guys in? Do you want to fit all those guys in, or do you want to start parting ways, with some of them? You know one thing, that Jim has a plan, that this was, while he tinkered with, what was it, a couple of years ago? He had the interview in Minnesota, didn't get it. Kevin O'Connell got it, and he basically said, I'm done doing the NFL stuff. And then the next year he talked with Denver. And you knew it was never done. It was never out of it. So he has a plan, not only a list of coaches that he wants, but a plan on how he wants to attack. Because while he was in the NFL, this NFL, even though it was a little while ago he was in it, this NFL is certainly a little different today than it's been. But the bottom line is, he has a quarterback. So he is ahead of the game on a lot of other people of the non-playoff teams because he's got a quarterback.
I think that is not insignificant what you just brought up, that he has been thinking about what he would do making the jump to this level for a while now because of that. You've got to go in and present that plan. You've got to go in and present how you're going to operate with what the team's got when you do a lot of these interviews. So it's a great thought about what the Chargers are getting, which I think we all view as the consensus best coach available on this hiring cycle, and that's saying a lot. Dad, you talked about college and the void he leaves behind at Michigan now. I saw Cole Kubelik tweet this out just a second ago, that Jim Harbaugh is the first head coach in the AP Top 25 poll era to leave their school right after winning a national title to coach an NFL team. So even the way people thought about Pete Carroll and USC running from potential NCAA sanctions that Michigan's still going to be waiting out in the wake of the sign stealing scandal, the first to do it in a way that's the ride off into the sunset mode like Jim did here. And now the question is, who becomes the next Michigan head coach, and what are they getting ready to inherit because of all that stuff? And you mentioned the name before, Dad. I'm with you. This feels like it should be as easy as handing the baton to Sharon Moore, their offensive coordinator and offensive line coach, who during the suspended games for Jim Harbaugh went 4-0 in the games that he coached. I thought did a great job of the in-game decision-making that's indicative of a guy who wasn't overwhelmed by the moment. He seemed ready for it. It would provide continuity for you at a time in college football where I think there's a premium to be paid on that in the portal era, and especially this late in the cycle. I know there were Brian Kelly rumors from a while ago that I'm sure people are going to re-up. I'm sure Lance Leipold, who's gotten a couple of calls from this offseason, a guy who's got some ties up in the Midwest in that area, is probably going to get a call on this, but I think you've got a really compelling candidate in-house who would be able to shepherd you through what's likely going to be some tough years once the NCAA does come calling.
Well, I agree between that and Michigan lost their coach. And what have we seen of other big-time schools, and I'm going to get to in a second, lost their coach? How many players hit the portal? So if you can keep it somewhat the same, and Sharon has a great relationship with the players, they loved that guy, that maybe that helps in not having a disbursement of players all of a sudden. Some are going to leave. It happens every year to even the best team. Some are going to leave. But I think to keep the ship from, going off course too much, you go right in-house there. And then, like I said, it'll depend on the staff of how many people Jim takes, if he takes anybody, or if some of those assistants get hired somewhere else. But I hope they do that. I hope Sharon is the guy. They would need to make that decision pretty quickly, I would imagine, as time keeps going on this. Also, I haven't done the research, but I feel pretty confident in assuming this, even though you're not supposed to assume. We've had, 10 years of the playoffs? Of the 4 teams left all the time, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is the year that the most coaches were not there afterward. I mean, 3 of the 4 coaches that were in the playoffs are gone. Nick Saban retired. Jim just went to the Chargers, and Kalen DeBoer left Washington, went to Alabama. Steve Sarkisian is the only coach standing from the Final Four. I'm just going to go on a limb and say that's the most coaches that left from a Final Four group in this era.
Yeah, we don't need to check with anyone at StatsInfo or anything like that. I think we can comfortably say that's the most that we've seen there. And it creates an interesting setting in college football because that's the 4-team playoff. It's not even like we lost 3 coaches from the 12-team playoff group. Everybody got up and left the table after this one. So it is. And Jason Fitz asked this question at some point in the show. We can kind of visit this. It is from that standpoint, Jim Harbaugh does also leave behind a void of personality. He was a guy that was quirky, that had, the sleepovers at recruits' houses and the satellite camps that ticked everybody off. And just in general was a football guy of the highest order that always gave us something interesting to chew on as the public. And now he's gone. And in a sport in college football that, like college basketball, like a lot of college athletics, where the coaches are the ones with more staying power and the ones we're used to seeing out front, there are a lot of changes in terms of the personalities lost and who ends up becoming the faces of college football now. I still think there's plenty of incumbents around. Dabo Swinney, when Clemson's up and running, is an extremely polarizing candidate. Kirby Smart's the final boss now. You've got Lane Kiffin poking everyone with a stick still down there, while the Dan Lannings of the world kind of descend. So I still think college football is in a good place with that, but there's no doubt it's going to look different now. And NFL, let's put it this way, Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers social media team, that might be the best match made in heaven of all of this right now. One of the most powerfully online admins now gets content gold handed to them.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. 49ers are facing the Lions this weekend, the NFC Championship. So we got a Niners legend joining us right now. 3 Notre Dame dudes just hanging out together. The guys are joined now by Bryant Young.
Yeah, Bryant Young, Super Bowl champion, NFL Hall of Famer, but as Jesse said, let's not bury the lead. One of the greatest D linemen in the history of Notre Dame football. And I think very appropriately to start this conversation off, Notre Dame dad now, BY, you just dropped off your son Bryce in South Bend. He early enrolled there. He's a 5-star DN prospect. He's got the whole world in front of him. But what was it like for you having to go there and drop off your baby boy now at your alma mater?
Bittersweet, sad, all the above, all the emotions were there. Really just excited for him. Just he's worked extremely hard for this moment, and to be a part of that and for him to come to this conclusion and make that decision for himself, we're just so extremely happy for him. He's put the work in, and it's just beginning. So we're excited for that next step for him.
So, I'm sure you've given him sage advice along the way as he was getting to this point, but I'm wondering if you could, right before you left, what was the last thing that you shared with him about his future experience at Notre Dame?
The last thing I shared with him is I did just like this. I was like, you have a legacy, you had a great start, something beautiful. Now it's your turn to continue to write your own story and create this legacy for yourself. Regardless of how things started for you, like you have this incredible opportunity just to rewrite not history, but just make this thing as big and great as you want it to be. And so I just wanted to make sure that I encouraged him to make good choices, to take advantage of every opportunity and continue to work hard.
Well, it's sage advice, and I hope he listened to you a little bit more than I listen to my dad at times as a young, dumb 17-year-old kid who sometimes push back on that advice. So it's all pretty good stuff, and I think he would do pretty well to listen. Bryant, I saw you on the sideline of the 49ers and Green Bay Packers game last weekend in the divisional round there. The Niners gutted out a tough win there for you, someone that's been a part of a Super Bowl in that organization. I saw a lot of your former teammates from those groups were down there as well. What is it about this team in particular this year that you think makes them capable of being able to do that same thing and close the deal here?
They're a gritty football team. They got great talent, personnel, and anybody's bound to make a big play. I like the way they just play together. Great chemistry, first and foremost. But, the win wasn't pretty. It's the playoffs. And the most important thing is that they found a way to win. That team on the other side didn't do that. They didn't find a way to win. We just made one extra good play that helped us get that win. And so, even though it's not pretty, we got a chance to advance to the next round in the NFC Championship. I liked our chances. I think the quarterback did a fantastic job just in terms of creating something to put the team in position to win. And so he hadn't really done that before. I think that's what he needed to have confidence as he moves forward. But I think the kinks are out. The guys are going to play well, just learning from the last game, not dwelling on it. But you got to make sure that you keep the most important thing in front of you. Do what it takes to win. Make the play. That's all it is. Find a way to do it.
This is a team, Brian, each year we talk about having maybe the most complete team, and they've gotten close. NFC Championship games, into a Super Bowl, and lost a few years ago. Is this a team that with the talent they have needs to close this deal, or are they going to be looked at as you're kind of underachieving if you don't get to that status?
Well, I think can be said. They've been in this position before where they have advanced, and then just unfortunately they weren't able to get the win against Kansas City a few years back. But I think they're in great position. They have the team to get a championship. This is a team that was built over the years. Guys have gone. They've replaced guys. I think it's the right people. And the time is now. I think Kyle, with what he's done, and John, and how they built this team, and how they've cohesively, the great chemistry that they have in building this team. This is a team that's built to win, and so the time is now. I think they're going to capitalize on this year and this type of team that they have with the guys in that locker room.
You mentioned the quarterback there. Brock Purdy has been a lightning rod in the discussions around the NFL because he's a guy that came out of nowhere as the last pick in the draft. He might not be as talented as some of his peers that are also playing on championship weekend. Listen, you won a Super Bowl with a guy in Steve Young that's one of the greats of all time. Certainly not asking you to compare him to Steve, but what do you see in Brock Purdy that's been able to make him so successful early on in his career?
He's for a young guy, he's pretty poised. I think the game is not too big for him. I think he does an excellent job executing and running the offense the way it's supposed to be ran. He's utilizing all the weapons, going through his first, second, and third reads and his progression. And when he has to, I think just taking the chances to extend plays a little bit more, maybe go run and get that extra a yard or a first down. But I think he's doing a fantastic job. The game is not too big for him. He's poised, he's confident, and he's under control. And so that's what you want in a quarterback. And I think he's the guy, for a young guy that no one gives a chance to win. I think he's the guy that's going to get it done. I like how he's handled things. I like how he's handled the pressure, and nothing rattles him.
Brian, you and I, the only thing we have in common is we had DL after our name in the NFL. The careers went separate ways from there. You ended up in the Hall of Fame. I did not. But we had to chase quarterbacks. And facing a guy in my era, now there were running quarterbacks, but what you see Lamar Jackson doing in Baltimore would scare the hell out of me in trying to catch him. Who was the guy? You played from 94 to 07. Who was that guy when you were playing that was like, oh my God, if he takes off and run, is he tough to catch?
We didn't have too many guys in our league at the time until Michael Vick came, and Michael Vick really changed the game. And Brad Culpepper was that guy a little bit who could run, but mostly he was a pocket passer. But when Michael Vick came, I tell you what, he really changed the scope of the game, just in terms of what he could do with his arm. And then just, being able to take off and extend plays and become that extra back that you don't really account for as a quarterback. He was the guy you had to worry about when he was back in the pocket. You had to make sure you had tight rushes, make sure you didn't get too high in your rushes on the edge, make sure you were collapsed on the pocket, and keep them contained in the pocket. And so you had to be very cautious in terms of how you rushed. If you got too undisciplined, he could hurt you for sure.
I'm sure the prospect for this weekend of rushing a guy like Jared Goff is a little more appetizing for the defensive line for the 49ers than having to track down Mahomes or Lamar Jackson. So I could see Bryant Young licking his chops, and I'd imagine the 49ers D-line is going to try. They're going to have to go through that great Detroit Lions offensive line first, though, to try and get there. Bryant, we appreciate the time this morning. It was great to see you last weekend. Thanks so much. Congrats to you and your family on your son heading to South Bend. We're all excited to watch him work and hopefully see you back around the dome plenty.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. It's always great seeing, guys like that come back around Notre Dame and their kids are playing. It makes me feel really old again, in seeing that. But very cool, very cool. And there's been more than a few, like Brian Urlacher's son is going to Notre Dame. So we're seeing a lot of NFL greats and their kids now heading off to Notre Dame.
Well, I mean, you should feel old because your oldest son already went through all that and is now like 34 years old on the other side.
Yeah, it's true. I guess I should feel old because I am old. I guess that runs into it a little bit.
You're the blueprint.
Yeah.
You're mapping it out.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate that very much.
There we go. Some kind words to finish on from the Hall of Famer. We're dadding it up in here this morning.
to GoJo and Golic. Let's talk about one of the QBs in the AFC Championship, specifically Lamar Jackson, who's had a monster season, especially on the ground. 148 rushing attempts, 51.3 rushing yards per game, 5 rushing touchdowns, 11 fumbles. I mean, guys, he's been incredible. Now, looking at this game, do we think that the Chiefs are in a better position to handle Lamar on the ground than perhaps the Texans were when you look at this matchup?
I would say so. I mean, listen, the Houston Texans statistically during the year, as far as their profile, were a good rush defense. And so personnel-wise, they were going to be ready for that. What DeMeco Ryans brought over schematically from his time in San Francisco certainly meshed pretty well right away. It was the back end that was more worrisome for them. But, Dad, just I think from a maturity of the football team standpoint, you saw the youth in some critical moments on display in that game the other week for Houston as the game went on. There's none of that worry with Kansas City, and especially a defense helmed by who they've got there and Steve Spagnuolo. They're going to be prepared, and they're going to, I think, have to make the choice, Dad. I'm curious for your thought on this because I've been asked a bunch this week. What do you try and do? What do you try and make your focus if you're the Kansas City defense going up against what this Ravens offense has become? And to me, I think with all of the new tools and elements the offense has added, it's still got to be at the very base level of it here. You can't let Lamar Jackson's legs be the thing that beats you the way that we saw it for Houston last week. I think you've got to take that away first, try and make them one-dimensional on the ground, and then work everything else from there.
So there's two different ways. And listen, you're right. Kansas City is more prepared than Houston, but that doesn't mean they're going to have success, right? I mean, they were middle of the pack in the regular season against the run. They're actually giving up more yards in the playoffs against the run, I think, than they were in the regular season. So how do you play now?
182 to the Buffalo Bills this last weekend, I believe.
Right. So even in my era, we did have some running quarterbacks, and there were ways. Not as many where they had planned runs. Okay, they spread it out really well, did Baltimore in their game. Lamar had 11 carries. Justice Hill had 13. Gus Edwards had 10. And even Dalvin Cook got his feet wet a little bit and had 8 carries in this game. Now, they had a big lead in the second half, so they could do a little more. But the biggest difference, Mike, is how we normally dealt with quarterbacks. And even in Bryant Young, who we just had on's era as well, is you dealt mostly with a active quarterback when he broke the pocket. Here you're getting planned runs. So for me, I try and keep the game as simple as I can. All right? It's not rocket science. They have planned runs with Lamar Jackson. And when you have planned runs, you have an extra blocker in the running back, unless you're faking it, unless you're running some kind of an option where you lose that a little bit. And it may sound simple. It may sound it can't be that easy. Play your responsibility and beat the man in front of you. I mean, the game, as much as we want to chess match it, you know this, Mike, if you don't beat that guy in front of you, he's going to come off and make the tackle. If I don't beat that offensive lineman and I'm not in the B gap where my responsibility is the B gap, whether they run at the B gap or they run away from me and cut back to my gap, if I'm not there, that's on me. So on planned runs, those, quite honestly, should be easier to defense because you see them on tape, you know formations, play your responsibilities. You know, if he's faking to the running back, don't crash down if you're the D end. Don't just crash down and say, I want to make the play behind the line of scrimmage because he's going to pull the ball and have an easy run around the corner. Or just in a quarterback power run, he's going to have that extra blocker. So normally that safety's got to come up and be able to take that blocker out. So to me, the planned run should be the easier thing. And nothing's easy against Lamar, don't get me wrong. But you've got to play your responsibility to it. The tough part is when you lose contain on a pass, because now he's got a two-way go. Depending on your coverage, right? Zone, man, hell, you're in trouble because people normally have their back turned and he's gone. And please don't get into a spy. Don't spy. If you spy Lamar Jackson, you're wasting a player because he is not tackling Lamar in open space. So I think that's a waste of a player. So if it's man, could be Katie bar the door. If it's zone, now you're making a decision. If you're in zone, as he's coming to the line of scrimmage, he puts you in that position of, do I have to go up and take him, or do I hang in my zone because he's going to dump it off? And he's got the two-way street on you. So it depends. The toughest thing, as I said, was when they break the pocket. When it turns into the scramble where he can beat you with his arm or legs, that's the problem. The planned runs, it's just you got to beat your man. You got to fill your hole. You got to be in your gap.
Yeah, I think Lamar always tests your discipline because so much of football can be boiled down to you're trying to put players in conflict. And whether that was the triple option for so many years, the most basic level of football, or whether it's most recently when you think of run-pass options, the whole idea is we're trying to get one defender and make him uncomfortable with what we're doing schematically. Lamar Jackson is one-man conflict. Every play that he is out there, you have so many variables that you have to account for, and especially this year now, because Todd Monken's put him under center more. We saw, Dad, the perfect example of what you're talking about and why it's so difficult is normally people think about that when Lamar Jackson's in the gun and it's a read option look and he's staring down the D end and they're trying to figure out, put him in conflict. We saw them not only have a fourth down pivotal play where Lamar Jackson lines up under center, there's the fake and they pull him back around, running behind Ronnie Stanley for a pivotal first down on a fourth down and then a touchdown later on. You have always got to be aware of where he is because they're always a second away from using his legs to be the first thing that cuts you off. But that's just as important what you brought up in the pass game too, because with Lamar Jackson now, it's always been, you're worried about him breaking contain. You saw some of the youth of the Texans defense also show up. A guy like Will Anderson Jr. crashing down a little bit too hard. Lamar Jackson can break contain, and now you're having a bad time. You French fry when you're supposed to pizza. But at the same time, the Texans also did a good job of trying to heat them up early in that game. And Lamar Jackson has been so adept at standing in the pocket, making throws this year. He's been an absolute assassin in the intermediate area. And you saw him stand and take hits and deliver inside the pocket, buy time in there and make some clutch throws. And so it really is so much you have to worry about that. You're right. You've got to start at a base level with, all right, how are we just going to make sure that this guy doesn't run wild all over us? And who knows? It seemed like for the Bills, they were almost kind of, I don't want to say comfortable. At some point, you give the Buffalo Bills credit for being able to run it down their throat, but you focus so much in that game on making sure they didn't hit the big plays downfield, allocating resources that way so they couldn't beat you like that, and let Buffalo just bleed clock on the ground. I don't think that's going to work out nearly as well for the number one ranked rushing attack in football.
So what they do, and a way to stop it is disrupt, right? So for that's a guy like Chris Jones to disrupt. Yeah. If you can stop the flow of north and south and make a back hesitate and go east and west, and when I say back, I mean Lamar Jackson as well, and let your secondary come up and help. That's obviously a huge key. So keep them out of the flow of their normal run game and make them have to adjust. I don't know how to keep saying it. It's one-on-one situations. It's making penetrations. It's beating your guy. It's forcing them. Who gets to stay in their norm from an offensive side and a defensive side? If you're just running your plays, running your power one way, and you got a cutback lane, or you got a power, you got an outside run, and it's all flowing, continuously for you, and you're not getting hit to the second level, you're screwed. So it's incumbent on Spagnuolo as the defensive coordinator. How are you going to disrupt that? And from the passing side, listen, Kansas City is by scoring defense, one of the better defenses. But how do you get to the quarterback? How do you keep him in the pocket? Do you have guys that can chase him down? Rarely anybody has a guy that can chase him down at all. So this is a tall task. There's a reason Lamar is going to be the MVP, and there's a reason, at least I'm picking Baltimore to win this game. Lamar is just too big of a weapon right now.
It's getting scary at this point in the week because almost everyone I talk to is saying they're picking the Ravens. And anytime everyone's aligned on one side, I get nervous. And that's before you stare across at the other sideline and realize that Patrick Mahomes lives there. We should all be very, very afraid at what the Chiefs could potentially do this weekend. In talking about the Baltimore Ravens coming up this weekend, Dad, it's hard to ignore their potential win that could come in this round of head coaching hirings in the NFL. We mentioned before there were 8 jobs available. There are 4 left now in Seattle, Washington, Carolina, and Atlanta. And the way it shook out, Jim Harbaugh coming from the college ranks, Antonio Pierce staying and getting the interim tag taken off in Las Vegas, Brian Callahan taking the job in Tennessee, who I don't think was one of the names that was near the top of at least the publicly discussed list of coaching candidates that we had this offseason. It's really interesting to think about. Teams that are left right now, the Detroit Lions, Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator, who they said was a coup that they got to hang on to him this last year.
Yeah.
Mike McDonald, the defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens that everyone expected to be in demand. Hell, Todd Monken, their offensive coordinator that they got this year that has helped revitalize that offense a little bit. They got to be looking around going, all right, this game of musical chairs is starting to get pretty late early. If you're able to hang on to those candidates for another year in all those spots, Dad, it completely changes the dynamic in a lot of ways going forward. But it's kind of been amazing. Have you been surprised the way that this coaching cycle has shaken out, given those names all seem to be ones we thought were going to be in demand?
Yeah, I think the one name right now, because we all figured Harbaugh to Chargers, right? And we all hoped Antonio Pierce was going to get the interim tag taken off, and he did. And once Belichick left, a lot of us thought, well, is Vrabel going to go there, or will they go with Gerard Mayo? And it turns out he had that deal in his contract. Yep. So those were 3 least surprising. The Brian Callahan one caught us off guard a little bit, right? Because everybody was talking about Ben Johnson. Now he's still obviously coaching, with Detroit, and Atlanta is interviewing everybody in the world for a second time. So as we talked about last week, there's only X amount of chairs. In this case, there were 8 and there were 4 left. There's a hell of a lot more than 4 candidates out there. So some are going to keep circling the musical chairs and not have a seat. So it is getting interesting now, and one of the more interesting things to me, Mike, is Bill Belichick, 4 jobs taken, he doesn't have a job. And what we thought was a given, almost a given, to Atlanta, all of a sudden seems like that's not only not a given anymore, but may not even be happening anymore. Now, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I don't know what the conversations are of what Bill's asking for, or what Bill wants, or the reports that Arthur Blank likes Bill and wants Bill, but the rest of the organization is kind of like, I think we need to go in a different direction. But the GOAT right now of a coach who still wants to coach, 4 jobs filled, 4 jobs left, he still doesn't have a job.
There's no way he gets out of this offseason without a job if he wants one, right? Because you could ask the question, obviously Atlanta, it's a pretty one-track thought process for Bill right now in most of our minds, right? You've brought it up, trying to get Don Shula's all-time wins record, being as close as he is right now. That seems where he wants to be, but what he wants that comes along with it. One of the things we didn't get to discuss before with the Chargers job is Jim Harbaugh's probably going to have final say on the roster. They don't have a GM right now in Los Angeles, and they hired the coach before, which is kind of telling. Terry Fontenot's in Atlanta at this point. So for Bill Belichick, we heard about the end of his Patriots tenure. He mentioned being open to not having as much personnel control anymore. We don't know if that's extended to other organizations. But, Dad, all of a sudden, if you're Bill Belichick and your goal is to get to that wins point here, and the Atlanta job gets taken, and there's flaws in the Atlanta job as well. You don't have a quarterback of the future on the roster in that team. The defense improved massively, though. You've got a bunch of great skill players that you've drafted in the top 10 over recent years. But outside of that, if you're Bill Belichick, you taking the Carolina job if you can get it? You taking the Washington job if you can get it, given the state of those organizations right now?
I mean, what if that's his only choice? Now, Washington has the number 2 pick, so you're starting over with a quarterback there, right? Carolina doesn't have a pick because they traded away, but they have supposedly their quarterback who they're just starting out with right now, because that's one of the other things is you look at what's the best job available that's left. Atlanta, Carolina, Seattle, Washington. So we always say, who's set at quarterback? Well, Carolina has a second-year quarterback. Washington's going to start over a quarterback. Atlanta is looking for a quarterback, but they don't have. I don't think they pick until 10, I believe. Yeah. And Seattle has Geno Smith right now. So what's the best job out there? And there's 4 jobs left. Mike Vrabel's getting one of them, right? Vrabel's getting a job. And then there's Belichick and this Pete Carroll's name out. We haven't heard Pete Carroll's name anywhere. I know he has a position in Seattle, but we all believe he wants to still coach. So there's 3 right there for 4 left. Now, I don't know if those 3 get the jobs. I don't know about Pete, but there's a hell of a lot of O&D coordinators out there that are interviewing that are not going to get a job. So this is getting really, really interesting. I would maybe lean towards Seattle or Atlanta as the next best job going out there with Seattle. You have Geno Smith. I don't know how long that's going to be, but you got a hell of receivers on the offensive side of the ball. In Atlanta, you got, some great offensive talent there, but you're looking for a quarterback. So you could probably have a good discussion on which is the best one left. But like I said, in an era where you see the new first-time head coaches, we have one. I'm sorry, we don't have one. We have 3. Antonio Pierce is kind of that interesting area. But Brian Callahan, was the one that kind of really surprised us a little bit. As I said, there's going to be a lot of newbies out there looking for a gig that aren't going to get one.
Yeah, which could be a huge win for a lot of teams looking to maintain the continuity that they've built. For Detroit, this is huge. We always wonder what the dismount might look like from Ben Johnson. Lamar Jackson's done so much quality developing, and that passing attack in Baltimore has developed so well. Getting a one and done with Todd Monken would have seemed like a tragedy. Mike McDonald's defense has been the darling of the NFL this season. Put a bow on one thing: Atlanta, the 8th pick in the draft upcoming now, and so some decent capital to work with there. I think I agree with you, Dad. Overall, if you're looking for an organization that's been competent and is healthy in the right spots, Seattle does seem to be one. You got to overhaul the defense, and so that's certainly a concern. You've got to do a better job of getting pass rush there, whether that's personnel, scheme, or otherwise. But I think that would probably be if you're looking to go in and have immediate success. And again, for a guy like Bill Belichick, I do wonder what the premium on the ability to have immediate success is, given his age and what his goals are.
So, and do we even know if Bill is interviewed with any other team? With Carolina or Seattle or Washington? Or is it just Atlanta? And you look at the list, Atlanta has got a second interview with probably 10 coaches out there. They're just firing them off, bringing people in now that you can meet face to face. So this is getting really, really interesting.
It's one of those things, too, where you look at these situations, and I think we all need to be cognizant of the game. Like, there was a thought, with Jim Harbaugh taking the job as late as he did, I'm sure part of it was using the Falcons and some of the other interviews, using the Michigan contract as leverage to try and get the most that he can when we see the contract numbers out of the Los Angeles Chargers and the money there. The same could be true here. Bill Belichick, as soon as he left New England, we started hearing Atlanta. That started to be something that came up a lot. And so you wonder if maybe part of this is the power struggle if you're Atlanta, who is always going to be disadvantaged coming in, right? The 28-3 memes aside, Bill Belichick's the greatest NFL coach of all time, walking into an organization that has been a loser for quite some time now. And so I wonder if part of this is maybe Atlanta trying to play a little hardball, understanding the market's not super great outside of them for jobs right now.
And if the reports are true that ownership wants Belichick, but management isn't too sure, you just wonder if they're just firing through all the candidates to try and say, listen, we think this one is better or that one is better, that there's internal conflict in Atlanta on which way they want to go, and just bringing in a lot of candidates just to say, hey, to ownership, we think this guy might be better than Belichick right now. It's a weird dynamic, one we have not been through with a coach as accomplished as Bill Belichick, though the last few years not as accomplished, obviously, and we see some of the warts there. So in seeing another team want to really take a chance with him or not.
It's amazing. And I mean, we didn't even get to half the other coordinators. You mentioned everyone Atlanta's been speed dating through. Ejiro Evero, the defensive coordinator from the Panthers this last season. Raheem Morris, a former head coach in the DC for the Rams this year. Bobby Slowick and everything that's gone on with that Houston offense. Another one of those darling names that might now be a year away for a lot of these candidates because of what we've got hanging in the balance. Is, I think, kind of like what we saw with Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers. I think the simplest solution and the simplest answer is still going to be Bill Belichick winds up in Atlanta, but right now we're seeing every bit of the resources exhausted.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. All eyes are going to be on the QB matchup in Baltimore on Sunday, and Lamar Jackson is certain about one thing. He is not looking forward to going toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes.
I don't like competing against him at all. But yeah, I mean, he's a great quarterback. Definitely a Hall of Famer. It's not even it's a no-brainer. He's definitely a Hall of Famer. But it's just, I believe it's just two greats, up-and-coming greats, just going toe-to-toe. You know, like a heavyweight fight, heavyweight matchup. That's just what I see.
He's right about that, guys. Two greats going head-to-head. It's amazing. Here to talk about the game with us, Richard Sherman joining the guys live right now.
Yeah, speaking of another great, a Super Bowl champion and a guy who is due for a gold jacket some point down the road here pretty soon. Kind enough to take us in. And we were talking off air, Richard. It's an incredible slate of football we got coming up this weekend. For a guy that has lived this time of year and has been on some of these deep postseason runs, what kind of feelings come back to mind for you when you start to see guys going through the weekend that you know so well?
Just intensity, preparation, just hours and hours and hours and hours of film study, routine. Guys are in their routines. Guys got things they do that keep them where they need to be. And then it's just details. It's just details, taking care of your body, making sure you get to the game in one piece, because usually when you get to the game, you got something. Everybody has something. It's a knee, it's an elbow, it's a hand, it's a finger, it's a toe, it's a shoulder, it's a back, and you just got to find a way to get through it, because nobody cares about the excuses. At the end of the day, you got to execute.
So I only made it to the divisional round, never to this round or the Super Bowl. As you get up in rounds, is there the pressure where you maybe press a little too much, or you try a little too much, maybe do more than your responsibility because you know the gravity of the game?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I tried not to, and I'm sure some guys do. I'm sure that it gets to some guys. I tried not to. I tried to just, and that was one of the better things about Pete Carroll's philosophy is he said treat every game like a championship. So you always felt the same. You wake up and it's always a championship. It's always a Super Bowl. It's always, it's always a big game. And so when you get to big games, you don't really feel the moment. You're just in it. You're playing, you're bowling, and then you look up and confetti's falling down, or they're putting up a stage, and you're like, oh yeah, this was a championship. Oh, yeah, let's go over there. Let's go look at the trophy. Give us a T-shirt. Give me my T-shirt. Give me my hat, and then the game's over. But I think if you ask some guys, I'm sure they're like, man, this is a bigger game. This is a bigger moment. I try to go do as much as I can. But when you feel like you trust the guys around you, you just say, hey, if I just do my job today, we'll get it done.
You mentioned Pete Carroll as someone who helped you guys with that. How much do you think that experience matters from a coaching standpoint when it gets to a weekend like this? You've obviously got Andy Reid and John Harbaugh, who are very familiar with this, Kyle Shanahan as well, and then Dan Campbell and the Lions making their first trip here, bursting through the wall. How much do you think that does show up on a weekend like this?
Well, for Dan Campbell, I don't think it matters, because Dan Campbell's a gambling man. Dan Campbell's going to do things the same way he did all season. Now, if you tell me Dan Campbell's going to get in this game, he's not going to go for it on fourth down, he's not going to fake punt, he's not going to be the guy he has been all season to get his team where they've been, then I'd be disappointed. But I think he's going to be. But I think it is important. I think it's important just because you know what to expect. You know how to approach it with your players. You know the right things to say to your players. You know on game day not to press, not to get overzealous, not to get overexcited, because for veteran older guys, they're not going to be so much affected if the coach is like up or down or left or right. But young guys will be sitting there riding the wave with him. If he's up, they're up. If they look at him and his head falls down, their head is going to fall down. But thankfully, they got a veteran quarterback who's been there before, in Jared Goff, who's been to a Super Bowl and played in big games.
Yeah, they certainly the talk of the NFL, considering how long it's been since they've been in this position. San Francisco has been in this position. I was fortunate enough to call this game last week, and while Brock Purdy certainly was off of it, let's first start there because it always comes into play. A team that's a number one seed, they get the last week off, so there's 19 days. Everybody says rest versus rust. So Purdy was off in some of his throws, and there's certainly some reasons. But let me start with that first. Do you buy into the rest and rust situation when a guy, especially that young, has that amount of time off?
I don't think it was rust. I do think it was rain. I think it was rain. And it's something that's, for some reason, San Francisco has struggled with every single year. Every single year. If it's raining, their fans know this is going to be a stressful game. And regardless of who the opponent, how good or bad they are, the year we went to the Super Bowl with San Francisco, we almost lost to the Commanders or the Washington football team. Or, I forget what they were at the time, but they were one of those things. But it just, we're slipping and sliding around the field, and it just, the ball slipping. Jimmy doesn't have a great game. Defense, we kind of give up more plays than we usually do. And you look up, and it's a ball game against a team that it shouldn't have been. And so it's just been one of those Achilles heels of the San Francisco 49ers for years. And I was glad they overcame it because I know the history. And I know usually in those situations, on top of, hey, they're down 7 going into the fourth, Kyle never wins those games. It was just all those things that had to be overcome.
And you mentioned about players being hurt. There's a 100% chance that everybody's got some kind of nick at this point. And if you get on the field, you just want to see results. You don't want to hear about injuries. But with San Francisco, how important or how bad will it be if Deebo Samuel, who's got the shoulder injury, is not on the field?
I think it'll be fine. I know the stats and everything, but I also knew the stats of them trailing going into the fourth by 7. Sometimes the playoffs bring different things out of you. And I think Kyle Shanahan will draw up a contingency plan this time. I think he went into Green Bay totally expecting Deebo to be there, and all his game plan kind of surrounded that. Even his first play of the second quarter or the third quarter when he gave the ball to Jawan Jennings because he forgot Deebo's not in anymore.
Yeah.
And he's calling a game like Deebo's playing. And so I think he'll draw up the play, the play sheet and the game plan as if Deebo's not playing, and one as if Deebo is playing. And if he can't go, he'll have a contingency plan ready, that may feature Jawan Jennings a little more, George Kittle a little more, Brandon Ayuk obviously, and use Christian McCaffrey in those spots.
I think you're absolutely right, and it's a great point about being able to adjust on the fly to injury versus having the whole week to prepare, and all of that is, again, going to be the things that fall in the lap of Brock Purdy, who has become somewhat of a lightning rod in the NFL. Richard, I'm curious, you obviously, as a 49ers alum and someone who works in the media now covering this, why do you think Brock Purdy has been so polarizing for so many people?
Because he's not supposed to be this. He's not supposed to be here. He's not supposed to be this good. He's not supposed to be in this position. And that's the part which is fine. Usually America loves an underdog story. They just don't love this one. For some reason, they do not love this one. But if you told me, like, playing quarterback and how good of an athlete you were would be the discussion in this day and age, I would have called you a fool back in the day, when it was Peyton and Drew and Aaron and Tom. Because outside of Aaron, none of those guys are great athletes. And so if you sat there and told me, hey, Drew Brees isn't as good as Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Jordan Love because he's not as good of an athlete, I would have told you to get drug tested because you're on something. But that's the discussion we're in. When you're telling me, hey, if you would have compared these guys to Tom Brady, before he had 7 rings, you would have said, hey, they're way better athletes than him. They got bigger arms. They do all these things, and he doesn't, so he can't be as good. And he was a 6th-round pick. And you know what I mean? It's just how the discussion has changed over time. It's like you don't even give him a chance to get a foot in the door anymore. This is a second-year quarterback we're talking about. This isn't a guy who's played terrible for 5 years and then all of a sudden woke up and is playing out of his mind. This guy won his first 7 games of his career, played really good, and then everybody said, I want to see what he can do over a full season. Over a full season, he led the league in a number of categories, played very efficiently, set out the last game of the season, probably could have had more stats. and led his team to a second consecutive NFC Championship. I don't know what else you want the kid to do.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And from the rain standpoint, the forecast, at least right now for Sunday, is sunny and 67, so they may not have to deal with the slick ball or the slick field. So put one in the column for San Francisco on that one. Let's go to the AFC side, but to one side. As a former D lineman, my job was just to rush the passer on passes. But I want you to talk about the back seven. When Lamar Jackson breaks the pocket with his ability to either run or hurt you with his arm, what goes on with the back seven, depending on the coverage, when a guy like that breaks contain on how you react or need to react as a secondary?
Well, I mean, you try to plaster initially. The first thing you want to do is plaster and find a guy nearest you and stay on him, and chase him around, try to understand the scramble rules. If he's scrambling left, then everybody should be going left, and a person that's on the sideline to the left is going up the field, and you got to understand these rules so that you can cover these guys. Then you kind of got to look back at him and see, kind of gauge if he's past the line of scrimmage or not. Because, I mean, again, at that point, you're the last line of defense, and you got to get him on the ground. And so I think that's the way a lot of guys think about it. And then you got to kind of like corral him. You got to angles. It's almost like a kickoff where you're like, hey, I got to be on this side. You got to be on this side. You got to be in this lane, because you can't just say, oh, man, I'm going to go make the tackle, because he's one of those guys in open field that can make anybody miss, that can make anybody look really ridiculous. And so you got to kind of tackle him as a group.
It's certainly a tall task. Steve Spagnuolo is certainly someone that's used to tall tasks on the defensive side, coaching up that unit in Kansas City. All right, Richard, as we look towards this weekend, on each side, who's your pick to win and get to the Super Bowl from the AFC and NFC, and what do you think each game ultimately comes down to?
On the NFC side, I think San Francisco is going to win. I think it's going to be competitive early because Detroit runs the ball really well. They make enough plays on defense, but I also understand over the last 5 games they've given up 345 every single time passing. Their secondary isn't the greatest. At least their corners aren't. And I think Kyle Shanahan will be able to draw up some things. He'll look at Kevin O'Connell's that Minnesota Vikings tape where Nick Mullins kind of had his way, and they'll run some of that stuff, and they'll have some success defensively. This is one of the best O-lines that they'll face in the Detroit Lions O-line, but they're banged up. They're banged up right now, and I just think they've been playing man protection all year and then being able to slide and being able to ISO guys, and you can't play this D-line. Golic, you can't ISO these guys. Javon Hargrave, Eric Armstead, Nick Bosa, Chase Young. If you say one-on-ones across the board, they would pay half their salaries to get that in the playoff game. So I think that'll show itself. Maybe this D-line will get hot. They'll win that game. On the other side, I think it's going to be a defensive battle. I know we're talking about the quarterbacks, but I think it's going to be a defensive battle. I think Baltimore's defense is one of the best defenses that the NFL has seen in a long time. I think they're physical. I think they got pass rushers galore, and they just rotate them in. There's no big name that you're like, this guy has to go off. They're doing it. Jadeveon Clowney, Justin Matabike. They're doing it guy after guy. I mean, even I always forget his name. They got him third, fourth game of the season.
Kyle Van Noy.
Oh, Van Noy. Dalvin Hoy is over there having a career year in Mike McDonald's defense, and he wasn't expected. He was out of the league. He was pretty much out of the league on the couch, and that's what I mean. They found a way to get the most out of guys. Kyle Hamilton, but I think the underrated part of this game is Spags' defense. I don't think anybody giving them a chance. They're treating it like a normal Kansas City defense, like a normal year. They usually have a middle of the pack defense, fringe top 10, and then they just kind of make plays in the playoffs, and everybody's like, well, you got no names, Chris Jones and everybody else. But these guys are playing really good. L'Jarius Sneed probably should have been a Pro Bowler this year, All-Pro. You got him. Justin Reed is playing good football. Chris Jones, George Karlaftis. You got guys making big plays throughout these games. Even Watson at the corners having a solid season. And so I think they're going to play well. And then I think it's hard to bet against Patrick Mahomes. So I got Kansas City.
Yeah, it meant going back real quickly to Baltimore, 60 sacks, led the league. 16 different players have had a sack, to your point of they can spread the wealth out. All right, Richard, before we let you go, I want to look at the coaching side. I want to touch on Harbaugh for a second, but before that, how surprised are you? 4 jobs taken, 4 jobs left, and Bill Belichick still doesn't have a job?
I'm not as surprised by that, just because I would like him to say it more than me speculated, but the way he's been in New England in terms of having all the power over everything. He's the judge, the jury, and the executor. You know, he's the guy. I'm the GM. I'm the president. I'm the head coach. I make all the shots. I call all the shots. And I just don't see any organization that's going to have guys come in and interview him and then say, well, you can fire me after this interview. After we hire you, you'll take my job and then you'll do it. Like, I just don't see anybody signing up for that. And so I think unless he adjusts his philosophy, then he's going to have a hard time.
It's a great point. Nobody is going to sign up to have their successor right there in the room with them, and that wasn't the case for Jim Harbaugh, who gets to sign up now as the head coach with Chargers with no GM in place. It seems like he's going to have a lot of control. Richard, he's a guy that you played for in your time at Stanford. What is the player experience like playing for Jim Harbaugh?
Well, I never played for him in the NFL, but he's a different kind of guy. You know, he usually hires great coaches around him. He's kind of quirky at times. You know, he's out of the ordinary. He's kind of, sometimes you look at things and you're like, man, that's not the way everybody else would do it, but I respect the way you're doing it. You know, because in college you got winter conditioning, you got things like that, and he may have guys wrestling and see who can take the sock off of a guy instead of doing a normal 6 a.m. drills. And you're like, well, I'm a corner that weighs 180 pounds, and that's a 360-pound lineman, and you want us to wrestle for a sock. I just don't feel like this is going to go well, but I got you. I'll do it because you're telling me to do it. You know, or he might have guys go out there and get on the track after a 6 a.m. workout and race for starting spots. And, you know, you're like, I'm the starting corner, and I got to go race these guys in a 200 for my starting spot. And I'm like, well, I mean, I might not beat him in a 200, but I promise you I'm a better football player than him. But, you know, just the kind of competitive, you know, just get the competitive juices going and make things competitive year round. And those are the kind of things that he did. But he usually hires fantastic coaches around him. He's usually great in-game managing situations, making decisions. You don't hear, you know, many situations where Jim Harbaugh made the wrong decision. He went for it when he shouldn't have. Or he didn't punt here. He kicked the field goal here, or should have went for it here, and he didn't. Usually he's making the right decisions, and he got a good scheme offensively and defensively.
Pete, or Richard, only about a minute left. I want to talk about a guy you did play for in the NFL, and that's Pete Carroll. If Pete Carroll wants to coach again, do you think he will?
Yeah, I would hope he would get a job. You know, he again, not like Belichick, is just going to come in and coach, going to try to establish a fun culture, positive, find good coordinators, and run the ball, put a young quarterback in good positions, and play some good defense. So I think if he wants to coach, he probably will.
It's going to be very interesting to see. The game of musical chairs in this coaching cycle is starting to shrink pretty rapidly right now. We still have Hall of Fame caliber names hanging out there if there are jobs that they still want here. So, Richard, we appreciate all the time and the insight today, man. Appreciate you stopping by. Should be an awesome weekend. Enjoy it, and hopefully we'll get to see you out there at the Super Bowl.
I appreciate it. Appreciate you guys having me on. Always a good time.
We really appreciate you being on.
Absolutely. Richard Sherman, you can check out and among a number of things, certainly over on Fox and as a part of the Thursday night on Prime crew that did a great job for so much of this season. But Dad, I think that's a good point to finish off too about Jim Harbaugh in particular is all of those things he mentioned, steady in those decision makings. You do know what you're going to get. It's going to be a little wild sometimes. There's going to be milk on the table at a lot of meals, and apparently you're going to have to try and take people's socks off at times they don't want it. But all the rest of the football stuff seems like it'll be pretty well controlled.
That is a hilarious story to take the sock off. So, I mean, had to be a quirky guy to play for, but by God, he gets results, and that's all that matters.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. The Pro Football Writer Awards are out, okay? So let's talk about them. Lamar Jackson is the MVP. Christian McCaffrey, Offensive Player of the Year. Myles Garrett is Defensive Player of the Year. So guys, what do we think? Results are in. Do we think these are like precursors to the NFL awards? Can we draw a little correlation here?
I would say so. I think most of these seem like what we would expect for a lot of these across the board, right, Dad? I mean, Christian McCaffrey is a guy that drew a lot of MVP talk early in the season before I think Lamar Jackson really put the foot on the gas, starting in that Rams game on down the home stretch. Myles Garrett and Defensive Player of the Year is going to be interesting. There were a lot of compelling candidates, especially among the edge players. And he was a guy that towards the end of the season sort of tailed off in production as that shoulder injury started to hinder him. But in general, this seems like, especially from Lamar Jackson as the MVP, that seems like a foregone conclusion now. And Christian McCaffrey as Offensive Player of the Year, I thought him or Tyreek Hill would both be pretty deserving of that.
Yeah, I would hope Christian McCaffrey will come in at least second for the MVP behind Lamar Jackson. He deserves that. And if there is a player out there, a non-quarterback, that would deserve MVP, it is either one of the two, Christian McCaffrey or Tyreek Hill. And I would lean toward Christian McCaffrey this year. Defensive Player of the Year, Mike, how about TJ Watt? I mean, TJ Watt has as many more tackles for loss than Myles Garrett and Micah Parsons. He led the NFL in sacks with 19. He had 4 forced fumbled, 3 recovered, 1 for a touchdown, more than the other guys as well. Myles Garrett and Micah tied for 7th in sacks at 14. So I don't know. You picked Miles before. You picked Miles, right? I think I picked Micah and you picked Miles. But man, it's tough. It's tough not to put T.J. Watt in there. He led in sacks, and there was Trey Hendrickson, Josh Allen, Khalil Mack, Danielle Hunter. But T.J. Watt, I mean, every game, not just sacks, but again, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries, had an interception as well. There's part of me that would lean toward him as a defensive player of the year, quite honestly.
TJ Watt, the 2021 Defensive Player of the Year as well. So already got one of those under his belt. Nick Bosa, the defending Defensive Player of the Year, which is a funny thing to say. But yeah, it's one of those things, Dad, where like my lukewarm take on all this is I'm kind of comfortable with most of the guys in that edge trio being the winner of this award, considering what they do. I think Myles Garrett overall for me, when we have these conversations, TJ Watt's incredible. I don't want to take anything away from him, but Myles Garrett is a one-of-one space alien type talent that you watch. Sort of the argument that we make for Lamar Jackson, where even if the statistical profile doesn't normally scream MVP, when you turn the games on and you watch the effect they have on opposing team, it's nightmarish. And so maybe that's part of the old O-lineman in me, where it's the guy that you at least want to block, and Myles Garrett is number one on that list every time. He is a terrifying, scary monster.
Plus, I think that puts him in a category. And Micah as well. They'll move around. I mean, we've seen Myles Garrett standing over a guard. We've seen Micah do that as well.
Which should be illegal, by the way. It should be against the rules. You freaks that want to ban the tush push, but want to let this persist. No one signs up to play. Most centers, you're like 6'2", 6'3", maybe 300 pounds, and supposed to be hidden in the middle. I'm supposed to have help everywhere. And you want one of these freak shows with all these defenses that want to line guys up at the line, so I got to block that one-on-one. It's crass, inoffensive, it's unnatural, and it's an abomination. It shouldn't happen.
So from that standpoint, both those guys and their versatility of moving around, and then just the fact that every interview I ever see Myles Garrett do, he doesn't have a shirt on, which is exactly how it should be. Yeah, it's ridiculous looking at him. Ridiculous. I say that, and every time I do a San Francisco game, when I see Nick Bosa warming up, he wears a cut-off T-shirt with cut-off on the arms and a T-shirt that fits, like a glove on him, and I just say, my God, how does that happen? How do people become that impressive body-wise? But it is incredible. But Myles Garrett, you're right, is an absolute, alien out there in what he does. So from that standpoint, between T.J. Watt and Micah Parsons and Myles Garrett, he is the freak show out there. But that will be. I'm with you though as well. I could go different ways there on that. It's not like if Myles Garrett got it, I would be like, oh, no, TJ should have got it. And if TJ got it, I wouldn't be like, oh, my God, Myles should have got it. I'm cool either way there.
And that's the same way I feel about the Offensive Player of the Year when it comes to Christian McCaffrey or Tyreek Hill. Both had an unbelievable effect on their team's success. You could see the gravity that both forced from defenses and how it changed the math for the rest of their offense. I think you could maybe argue just Tyreek Hill because of the nature of that position. When you've got an outside receiver that bends the field, it does so much different in how you have to account for that. But either of those guys is deserving there. And so while the fan bases would be salty, I wonder, the players also feel some type of way about this. We got a window into that the other day. Rarely are players this candid all the time. There are some that obviously use this stuff as a chip and a motivation, but Raheem Mostert, speaking of Miami Dolphins, went on his podcast and made it pretty clear that he took being snubbed from the All-Pro team very personally.
On my phone here, let me show you real quick. This is my screensaver. I put, All-Pro, right? That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an All-Pro. That was important to me, and unfortunately, I didn't get that. I don't understand why I didn't. I didn't even get second team All Pro, which is mind boggling because I still had 21 touchdowns and over 1,000 yards rushing and over 1,100 yards, total. But yeah, we can talk about that another time. I was a little frustrated when I found out that I didn't even make second team All-Pro, but kudos to Kyron Williams. I know that he's a stud. I've seen him play, not in person, but from afar, and he's good.
He mentioned there Christian McCaffrey and Kyron Williams, the first and second team All-Pro members there ahead of him. And Dad, shades of Isaiah Thomas from The Last Dance, that feeling like I met all the requirements here. I don't know why I was on the list. And it's tough. And for running backs especially, Dad, for all these guys, it's not just an ego thing. I mean, this goes a long way in how you're treated contractually, how you're defined and revered by your peers. It's a respect thing here for these guys. And you saw a very concrete goal for Mostert in a time right now where running backs constantly feel like they're on trial for their football lives.
So the thing I'll say, and if Mostert made second team, I would be cool, but Kyren Williams, one thing we need to remember, Kyren Williams rushed for more yards than Raheem Mostert, caught more passes than Raheem Mostert, so he had more total yards than Mostert did. He didn't have as many touchdowns. He had 15 total touchdowns. Mostert had 21. Here's the difference. Mostert played in 15 games, so he missed a couple. Kyren Williams played in 12.
Oh, yeah.
12 games.
It's insane.
So he did all that in 12 games. So I'm very comfortable, not just because he's a Notre Dame guy as well, very comfortable with him getting the nod second team with those kind of numbers in playing that amount of games, right? I mean, that's pretty darn impressive. He was third in the league in rushing.
Not disputing it at all. What Kyren did this season is amazing, and it's not like he was the sole focus of that offense because they didn't have any other weapons. They got the offensive rookie of the year in Puka Nacua, who basically broke all of our brains, and you got him. You had Cooper Kupp come back during the season. There were weapons aplenty on that team and that offense, but he was an absolute difference maker and a force for them. You're right. In hyper efficiency in such a limited amount of games. And this is what we talked about with the Player of the Year awards here. Good players are always going to get left out, but I know it is disheartening because when your career's over, this is the stuff that gets listed on your Wikipedia page. 21 touchdowns in that season. You're going to have dig pretty deep to find that in the bio for Raheem Mostert. And instead, it's, hey, All-Pro team's going to show up there for guys that are looking about how they're defined and what their legacy looks like post-career. So I agree with you. I think these are absolutely the right choices. Christian McCaffrey's obvious, but Kyren Williams had a banger of a season and has showed very quickly the player that we all saw at Notre Dame is the same dude that showed up in Los Angeles.
Yeah, the biggest difference was touchdowns because Kyren Williams averaged 112 yards a game. Mostert averaged 79 yards a game. So while Mostert did have a great year, take nothing away from that. But when someone's got to be in and someone's got to be out, I'm okay with this choice.
You know what? He's going to get ready to play the disrespect card next year when he goes back to work. And coming up next, we'll get to the best sound from yesterday as America's team and America's quarterback played the disrespect card a big way yesterday.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. The Lions have a chance to make history, and they are dealing with a whole new level of prying eyes and attention, even for an NFL team. And Dan Campbell is not unaware that that can come with some distractions.
I mean, here we are. This is the biggest issue right now. I mean, most time I come in here and there's, 20 of you. And now there's a whole packed room, people I don't even recognize. And that's what our players are dealing with. It's all the extra attention outside of the norm. That's the issue. It's not the opponent. It has its own issues that we'll deal with, but it's all the outside attention and where they're getting pulled from every area. You know, you got friends, you got family reaching out. Unbelievable, you guys are here again. What are you going to blah, blah, blah. And, you know, you're such a phenomenal player. You know, you're a phenomenal coach. You're a phenomenal GM. And pretty soon, if you forget that it's us and it's about the team, you know. I think that's always the challenge this time of year when you get in these type of games and settings.
I love that Dan Campbell is basically being like, don't let it get to your head, fellas. Like, I'm not letting it get to my head.
It's the truth, though, and different level of football, like obviously college to NFL, so take this with, you know, for what it's worth there, but I was on perennial 500 football teams when I was in college at Notre Dame. And then the last year we caught fire and we went 12-0. And it was a very different season experience in terms of the outside attention. I remember by the end of the year, there were fans that wanted you to sign memorabilia. They were showing up outside of our football facility before and after practice every day in droves. By the end of the year, they showed up in the gate. Like they had to buy a ticket to get in by the gate when we were coming back from winter break to go back and start bowl practice there, to have us sign stuff in the airport. About midway through the season, a sign went up by the water fountain right outside going to the exit of our football facility that said, "What we say here stays here when we leave here. Ignore the noise," because the fire was starting to rise. To Dan's point about how people show up, I saw Sam Ponder 3 times that year. We had College Game Day multiple times. Everyone wants to make you feel special. Obviously, everyone remembers the Manti Te'o story from that year when Manti was a Heisman Trophy winner. But to Dan's point,
finally,
as you start going along as one of the good teams, everyone wants to tell your story. Everyone wants to make you feel special. And it does become, you know, distraction's a loaded word that we use in the NFL, but Dad, it is a challenge for your focus to then approach each day as the same and still go out there and do the things that at this point in the season, the Lions know what they need to do on a day-to-day basis to be successful. And it's to not let the rest of this ticket requests, family that wants to come by, all that stuff that as there are fewer teams in the dance become more and more prevalent, to let all that stuff not get to you during this important prep time.
And I would imagine it's a fine line. It was with you guys. And again, a big difference is you had 44 days to be number one in the country before that game. Is you want to be able to enjoy it as well, right? That you don't want to just, you know, seclude yourself from it and say, I don't want to deal with it at all because we got another game. And I'm sure with Dan and those players, it's kind of the same thing. There's part of enjoying it, and then there's part of, okay, we have a job to do. You have a couple players on that team that have been through it. Jared Goff, right, when he was with the Rams, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson when he was with the Eagles, who could lend a hand in talking to players. But for a lot of players, this is the first time they've only dealt with, you know, bad stuff there, right? Yeah. And now it's the good stuff. So the adulation is really piling on. So there is the fine line of enjoying it, but don't let it interrupt your preparation. You know, and I think that's what Dan is going to say. And that's what Richard Sherman said when we just had him on about Pete Carroll. Every game should be that way. You're preparing like every game is the championship game, and all of a sudden the confetti's flying down, and you're like, oh, yeah, we were playing for the title there. I thought that was a great comment by Richard on how Pete led it. Now, it's easier said than done to sit there and say, don't let it affect you, because you have so many people that are harping on you, and then just wait till how that magnifies for the winning teams this week going to the Super Bowl. And if it's Detroit, it had been so long from a championship, we're going before even Super Bowls, of what's going to happen. So that's really the job of the coach and the veteran players, especially like I mentioned, Goff and Johnson, about players who have been there, to try and really relay that to other players.
Yeah, and Goff showing that veteran presence already in the way that he's dealing with some stuff. Because again, Jesse, he's a guy that we talked about going into a lot last week. He was the cast-off. In the first round, he got to go up against the team that let him go in the Los Angeles Rams, that sent him to Detroit to begin with. And so he's no stranger to the noise, and he's talked about how that affected him, but he's also gotten very good at blocking out the noise from specific sources.
Yeah, there's like a narrative around him, but there's also a narrative around the team and everything. And he's been very clear that it's not just quieting the noise inside the building, also the noise that's outside the building.
Does bulletin board material matter to you guys at all?
It depends what it is. What do you got?
Skip Bayless, after your game, tweeted out the following.
No, I don't care about anything he says. You can stop now. That's not.
I love it.
No. Yeah.
No oxygen. No oxygen.
Yeah. No. Anything those guys say on daytime TV, you can skip over that.
So the tweet that we're referring to here from Skip Bayless is, "Congrats, Lions. You have won the right to get blown out at San Francisco. But hey, great year."
One of our nation's premier haters. He's so good at this.
Listen. I've been doing this a long time, and listen, Skip has been incredibly successful, incredibly popular with what he has done, and the way he does it. I'm just not a fan of it. I'm just not a fan of saying, in my eyes, stupid garbage like that. But that's what he has done. And it gets him a headline, and it's made an incredible career for him. So I'll separate that and say it's been great for him. It's worked for him. I just can't stand that stuff. I think it's ridiculous, and I would have the same reaction Jared Goff would have at a statement like that coming from someone like that.
Well, and the best part is, like, Jared probably knows what the tweet said. Because most players hear this stuff now. It's hard to be super insulated from it. And again, not to reference, the 2012 season too much, but I remember went through that with Rick Riley, like a guy that I grew up reading and revering, who wrote the article at the beginning of the season about how Notre Dame football was no longer relevant. And by the end of the season was so confident that we would go out and lose to USC that he said he would come to South Bend and personally shine our gold helmets if we ended up going to the national championship game. And to his undying credit, he came out there and paid the piper, did that with a bunch of us in the room and took his medicine there. But Dad, that is another thing that we talked about, comes to the table on this. And Jared Goff's a guy that's been used to hearing this slander about him a lot. He kind of, looking at Brock Purdy across the other side of the field, I'd imagine there's a lot of understanding there, albeit different paths. Jared Goff was the number 1 overall pick. It was different expectation. But Jared Goff's also been the guy that's been looked at on a lot of those Rams teams as, all right, you're kind of the one being brought along. You're not the first one people think of in terms of why we're winning football games. The credit goes to the coach. The credit goes, in that case, to the defense and the guys on the other side. And then you leave and they get the job done. And so he's used to being treated as lesser than in these situations, even for a guy with his resume.
Yeah, Jared Goff was the number 1 pick in the draft and got cast aside, right? Got traded away. When you're the number 1 pick in the draft, you are supposed to be, even number 1, the first couple picks, if you're a quarterback, you're supposed to be that team's quarterback for a decade, right? And we know it doesn't always work out that way, but that's the thought process of why they're taking you number 1. And it didn't work for him. And he got traded away. He got swapped quarterbacks with a quarterback in Detroit. At that point, a team that wasn't winning. So he went from number 1, I'm supposed to be the guy on this team, to now I'm getting traded. They no longer want me on this team, and I'm getting to a perennial loser. So, yeah, you could see how that would affect him, mentally on that side, to say, then what he has done to come back from that has been incredible. So kudos to him for that, and where he is now and where he potentially could take this team.
And so much of that, too, is the confidence that I think he draws from the group around him. We've talked about the Dan Campbell effect that it seems to have had on Jared Goff, where he would be comfortable saying like this. This did not seem like Jared Goff's personality in Los Angeles, but now as a part of this Lions group that I think is more Richard Sherman Seahawks, where those teams under Pete Carroll were allowed to be themselves. They were incredible personality-driven teams, as opposed to New England Patriots, where it's do your job. You're one of 22 out there on the field at any given time right now. This Lions team has, we've talked about, taken on the identity of their head coach, and I think nowhere is that more apparent than the transformation for Jared Goff, who, listen, Jared, baby, the folks over at GoJo and Golic love you here, so if you're going to discount what Skip Bayless says, just remember, we'll keep it real with you here. Jason Kabinda, your teammate's one of our good friends of the program right now, so Lion Pride, you got a home around here, don't worry. All right, guys, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you off on into the rest of your day. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us, leave us a 5-star rating, and check us out live Monday through Friday if you can from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Let somebody know we're here live on the DraftKingsNetwork.com YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, and more. But if you miss us live for whatever reason, you can always get us and catch our great guests. Our thanks to Bryant Young, Hall of Famer, former great 49ers and Notre Dame defensive lineman, and Richard Sherman. You can see him over on FS1. He was a part of the Thursday Night On Prime crew there, obviously, former all-time great NFL cornerback as well. You can get those wherever you get your podcasts or available on YouTube as soon as we get done here. Do want to credit, by the way, earlier we played some sound of Jared Goff responding to the haters. That was from 97.1 The Ticket in Detroit. Our thanks to them for some great insight from one of the quarterbacks that's going to be playing this weekend. But Dad, Jesse, let's get to this first. Speaking of great sound and great moments for the internet, Isaiah Pacheco has been a subject of a lot of really funny tweets because he runs like an absolute savage. And one of the best ones came from Jordan Lewis, who said that he runs like he bites people. And rarely do we get to see moments where the internet makes contact with real life, but Isaiah Pacheco gave us manna from heaven yesterday.
I would say the funniest one that I thought was, they said I run like I bite people. Like, I ain't no zombie. Like, that was crazy. Like, so that was one of the funniest ones. You said I run like I bite the ground, bite the grass. Yeah, that's crazy. So it's a great opinion, I guess, to have on the way I run. For me, it's just being determined and understanding that I have a goal to achieve and we want to get the job done.
I can't.
It's so great when people are actually forced. And this is the part about having like deeply online young football players now who can go through all this. I bet Isaiah Pacheco, who's a great story, has overcome a lot of personal tragedy in his family to get to this point and is going to be a huge part of, if they win this game, Dad, the Baltimore Ravens rush defense being the one place where maybe you can find some solace as an opposing offense. He's going to need to run like he bites a lot of people coming up this weekend.
Listen, he absolutely does. 5'10", 216. And I've said this about him since he's been in the league. If you're a young player out there watching, you always watch the people you emulate and watch where you want to go. While he's not going to be considered the best running back in the league, this is how you should run. This is how a running back should run. Every single play, they always say, play it like it's your last play. I swear he runs like it's the last time he's ever going to have a running play or ever touch the ball again in the NFL. And he does it every single play. His legs never stop moving. I mean, he's an angry runner. He's an aggressive runner. He doesn't shy away from contact, and he just keeps going. It's Mike, in all honesty, it's to break it down in its simplest terms, he's a pleasure to watch because we always talk about 100% every play, and that's tough to do. Listen, I mean, everybody wants to do that, but it's so tough to do. But to watch him run the ball and get the ball and I just love to know what's in his mind every single time, but he's got his mind trained so well that when he gets the ball, his aggressive style is just, it's great to see. I just love to see it because it's consistent every single time.
It's incredible. I think someone said whatever the opposite of no wasted motion is, but also respected by his peers because that tweet about him fighting people came from Cowboys defensive back Jordan Lewis. So he clearly recognizes that not a guy anyone really wants to tackle. And as these temperatures dip down in January into February football, that's a guy who you've already got the wind working against you, the temperatures working against you, and oh, by the way, you got to tackle the dude that looks like he bites people. So rest assured, he is not a zombie. He is just ready to go. Jesse, speaking of ready to go, let's get to that. Women's college basketball has been a star-studded event for the last few seasons. We've seen the TV ratings reflect that, and now the ticket price is also reflecting that as well for one of the biggest matchups of the season coming up.
Yeah, if you want to see number one South Carolina take on LSU on Thursday, it's definitely not going to be cheap, okay? Resale prices for this game, tickets are going for $3K. $3K, guys. Can you believe that number? It just goes to show, obviously, the rise in popularity in women's sports like you were talking about, GoJo.
Yeah, it's been incredible. And listen, Dawn Staley's South Carolina squads have been perennial contenders. No surprise that they're back in the number one spot. Dad Kim Mulkey's LSU team has had a little bit of a rocky season. You know, Angel Reese, one of the big stars of the sport, and dealing with that sort of cryptic suspension or whatever it was early in the season, has now given way to two of the best teams in the sport getting ready to meet. Between them and Caitlin Clark, and certainly what we've seen from a number of other programs, it's made so much of the women's game must see in a way that, Dad, used to be what so many people, I think in general, like college sports overall. Names that you recognize who are in school for long enough to get to know them, to get some rivalries that build up and give us moments like this where you've got known brand commodities getting ready to clash.
Yeah, for LSU, it was interesting, right? They lost right out of the gate to preseason number 20, Colorado. Lost opening day, and we were like, wow, okay, that's a little surprising. Then I think they lost I think it was about 12 days ago when they were sitting in the 7th slot. They lost to Auburn, and now they're ranked, I believe, 9th, 18-2, as South Carolina is undefeated. Yeah, this could be definitely a preview of a matchup, for the title down the road. But South Carolina, what they're doing is just... We know our guy Darius Rucker's about as happy as can be, seeing the Gamecock women and what they're doing right now. It's impressive. But we have talked about this for the last couple of years, the rise of women's sports and the popularity of it. And this has been one of the spots you really looked at to see that happening with women's college basketball, with some of the games we got and some of the stars in those games.
Yep, and we've seen it reflected in NIL evaluations and the way that people look at that and the money that's come into the sport to incredibly marketable athletes on the women's side. But we talked about this a little bit before, too. with the coaching changes in college football and who sits now as the face of the sport when you've got guys like Jim Harbaugh and Nick Saban either retiring or leaving for the NFL. Women's college basketball has had a lot of those faces for a long time. And you talk about in this game, Dawn Staley has been someone who has been one of the name coaches in the sport. She oozes swagger. She's always got great fits on the sideline, and she coaches basketball teams that are so physically imposing and will go out there and just bigger, faster, stronger you into the ground. That I think it's another one of those things that in a game that, we've seen, between, Pat Summitt and Gino Auriemma, honestly, for years, Muffet McGraw, Notre Dame's former coach, and certainly with what Dawn's done and Kim Mulkey in this game, you've got face of the sport type names in the coaching matchup for this one as well. But let's get to the third. Speaking of another one of the big names in the women's game, let's head to the WNBA as Nneka Ogwumike, now set to be former LA Sparks star, made a big announcement yesterday.
Yeah, she's leaving the Sparks after 12 seasons. Pretty unbelievable. Former WNBA MVP. She's played her entire career with the Sparks since being drafted number 1 overall in 2012. So apparently she felt it was really important to inform the organization of her decision to move forward. It's her first opportunity to be a fully unrestricted free agent. So guys, big news, big restructuring here in the WNBA perhaps.
It's huge, and we talked about all the head coaching meetings that have been going on in the NFL. Nneka, her sister Chiney, my former colleague, and also WNBA player. But Nneka's already taken meetings reportedly with the Sparks, the Atlanta Dream, the Phoenix Mercury, and the Chicago Sky. Also intends to meet with the Seattle Storm and the New York Liberty before making a decision. And Dad, that's what I'm sure everyone wonders now when you've seen these super teams form in places like New York and the Las Vegas Aces. If this is a place now late in her career, Nneka starts to look to see if you can go out there and chase one of these titles.
Well, everybody's looking to knock off the Aces, right? Vegas beat New York last year. I think it was 3-1 in the finals. The Aces have an incredible team, so you wonder if New York, every team is loading up. Again, New York right now seems to be the closest. They were the only 2 teams last year to have single digits in the loss column, so you wonder if that would be a landing spark for New York to really kind of load up to say, all right, the Aces are the team, and every team has to try and build to take them down.
Yep, and Nneka, certainly someone who knows what it takes to win a title, won one with the Sparks in 2016, was also named the MVP that year. She's the president of the WNBA Players Association, all of the great ground they've made up over the last couple of negotiations there. She's an all-timer, a family with 2 number 1 overall picks in the fold. Good work if you can get it. If you appreciate us as your number 1 pick for a podcast and show, download, subscribe, rate, review us. Leave us a 5-star rating. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.